everybody, I'm Roxy and this is Mildred Pierce. So today I bring you a very tardy December wrap-up. But before that, I want to mention that I did do a December TBR. I will link it down below and in the eye. However, as I mentioned in that TBR, unless something happened, I was going to be able to read most of those books, if not all of them, but a lot of stuff happened in December, and so I actually managed to read like 2. However, I am moving forward for January and February, which are my summer vacation months, with that TBR, and also with the library haul TBR, so you can check it out down below, just saying. Another important thing that happened in December was that I finally stopped giving star ratings on Goodreads. I did this because it became very stressful for me. I realized that while I was reading, I was evaluating everything, almost as if I was at university and reading this for a university course. But on top of picking apart everything, which is just critical reading, I was also evaluating it for a star rating, and I sometimes compare it to similar star ratings that I had given in the past, and are these books comparable? Are they, it was just, I got in my head so much, and I realized people can rate on enjoyment only, and that's alright, but I personally could never do that, and so I just stopped, and it's been awesome. Now, I do want to have the freedom to give out 1-star ratings in case like I really hate a book, or 5-star ratings in case I really love a book. Aside from that, I'm not going to give any more stars moving forward. If I reread a book, now that you can finally tally those on Goodreads, I'm also not going to keep the rating unless I feel very strongly about its 5-star rating, unless I'm rereading a 1-star rating book, which I hope I don't have to do, but you never know. That's all I had to say. Let's get on with the book reviews. The first book I finished early in December was Mildred Pierce, and this was amazing. This was the November pick for the Memento Mori Book to Film Club. I'll link that down below because you have to participate. It's a blast. And I loved it. It's about Mildred, a woman whose husband is really a good-for-nothing. He's a good guy, but he doesn't have any real drive in life, and he's made very poor choices, and so now they have a real lack of money. Instead of earning his bacon, he has a very strange friendship with an older woman, and so she can't deal with that anymore. So she becomes a waitress, which is a really hard blow to her dignity because her daughter Vida is a really proud girl. She's very beautiful. She's not talented per se as a pianist, which is what she wants to become, but she's very dignified and very charismatic. That sort of affects Mildred in such a way because she knows she doesn't have that sort of high class pride that Vida naturally has. The first part of the book is just Mildred trying to stay afloat, to carry her family forward, and especially give Vida what she wants, which is basically everything. And it's just such fascinating character study. I of course think it's Escalade, and I don't want to say anything else because I really think you should read it. Unmentionable, and this was on my TBR. This is a lady's guide to Victorian life. And this book talks about all those hygiene related issues and health related issues in the Victorian era that perhaps you have wondered about and you are curious about, but after knowing the answers, you realize you didn't really need to know. Nevertheless, this is a great book. It's so readable. I recommend it for everyone who enjoys, of course, Victorian times, but also people who are getting into nonfiction, because I think it's extremely readable. It's like chatting with a friend. Just read this book. Then I read Economy, A User's Guide. And this was also an amazing book by Ha-Joon Chang, an economist who's very unorthodox in his approach, but that's great because he doesn't let theory get in the way. And what he presents here are the history of contemporary economic thought, where it comes from, how it has affected political decisions throughout the 19th and 20th century, and it's amazing. It really is a good primer to start dwelling on economics today. I think Ha-Joon Chang succeeds in synthesizing different schools of thought and presenting them as unbiased as he can, and also recognizing his own bias, which is always important. So I really, really recommend this book. And I read a book by a Chilean author whose books have been translated into English, so I want to talk about her, but the book itself hasn't. So this is Las Infantas, The Children, by Lina Meruane. This book is a short story collection / novel. It's very experimental with a lot of fairy tale influences, which I didn't really love, but I want to read more by her. And I know like her more major novels have been translated to English, so if you want to check out a good Chilean author, check Lina Meruane. And so if I ever read a book by her that's translated into English, I will definitely review it. Then I read Posh Boys, and this is a book about public schools in the UK and how basically they are run by the elite, and they also serve to maintain the elite throughout time. Now this book was very informative and I did learn a lot, but for a book about public schools in the UK, it didn't make a great job of explaining what's the difference between like grammar schools and private schools and public schools and state schools. So I had to Google that because of course public in my country and other countries means state. They sort of mention it, but it was well into the book why public schools remain public schools, and he sort of used both terms interchangeably. So yeah, it was a bit confusing. I had to Google it, and then it became more clear. The other thing is that he very clearly advocates for the elimination of public schools. That's a very harsh claim to make, and I could get behind that if it were better justified. I felt like a lot of things were really brushed over, and with this I don't mean to say that privilege doesn't exist. As an outsider and perhaps not the target demographic for this book, I felt like the arguments weren't 100% compelling and they weren't that tight as they should have been for such a strong claim. I would recommend this book if you maybe don't know much about it, like don't know much hard facts, and also there are lots of references in the book that could lead you to understand better the public school system in the UK and what harm or possible benefits they can bring to any country. There were parts that were very shocking, and the prose was very inconsistent. Like some parts were really, really strong and I was like page turning, but then there were others that were blander, and I don't know, it was just a very roller coaster book for me in the sense that it wasn't very consistent, but I don't regret having read it, and I might revisit certain parts of it in the future. Then I finished, after almost 1 year, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I love this book, and I honestly don't know why it took me so long to read it. I know that whenever I picked it up, it was very readable. I read it technically like 4 sittings because I read so much, but the time frame between those sittings was kind of like months, and I don't know why I didn't want to pick it up. It was weird. It was a weird reading experience. I am going to reread it, but anyways, in case you don't know, this is about a young girl who's an orphan, and she starts working as a governess at a house, and she falls in love with the master, Mr. Rochester, and that's the basic premise, but it has gothic mystery elements. It's a great book. I love the prose. I did not like Jane Eyre that much, but I could see where she came from, and she has a clear personality. So even though I personally didn't like warm up to her, I was very interested in what she had to say because this is a first person narrative, and so the way she leads you through the story I think is very interesting, and I would revisit it and maybe read it, you know, in like a week or a normal time frame. And then the penultimate book I read was Just My Type by Simon Garfield. I'm so happy I finally read this book because I've had it on my shelves for like 3 years or so. Disgraceful. Anyways, this is a book about typography. It talks about the impact of types in our life how they are created, some historical facts. It has some font breaks where it talks about a specific font, and it's fascinating. However, the structure is kind of weird. It doesn't tell a story. For a book about typographies, it's a bit random. It's like things over there. Sometimes you think you're getting a historical tangent, but then you get like a font tangent and a people tangent, designer tangent, and it felt like Garfield could have structured it a bit differently in a way that felt more engaging. His prose took me a while to get into, and I feel like if the chapters hadn't been so short, and if the subject itself hadn't been so fascinating to me, I probably would have DNF'd it, which is not a great feeling to have. And again, I flew through the second half because I was so into it, and I did learn a lot with this book, but it's definitely not a perfectly written book, and especially structure, which I think is very important when you tackle such a big subject in a nonfiction book, wasn't there. And then the last book I read, and one of the reasons I don't like doing my favorites of the year in December, is the last book I finished in December, which is going to my favorites of 2018. And it's A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. So I read Christopher Isherwood for the first time this year with Mr. Norris Changes Trains, and that book was very entertaining, but this one was absolutely heartbreaking. So it's about a college professor who is thinking about the death of his partner. They lived together for a long time, and then his partner died in a very random car accident, and the protagonist doesn't really know how to deal with it, and he has sort of gone the hermit route. The book just follows him throughout one day, and it's heartbreaking. I also have seen the film of this book, and I remember it being as intense as I felt the book to be. I watched it a couple of years ago, more than a couple, so I wouldn't be able to make like a side-by-side comparison, but I remember it shattering me, and this book also shattered me. I of course recommend it, and I want to read more by Christopher Isherwood. And that's it. I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Please comment, what did you read in December, or what are you reading right now? Subscribe. I don't know if I already said that, and see you next time. That's the truth. Yeah, sorry.